Hello. Today we're going to talk about Dante's Purgatory, which is of course the second part of a larger work called the Divine Comedy. And if you haven't watched Inferno, which is the first part, then I highly encourage you to go watch it, as then you will have the whole context of the purpose of this story. Now, I want to start by saying that Purgatorio is actually a little better than Inferno. At least in my opinion. Because while in Inferno we were going from the lightest sins to the worst ones, here we are actually doing the opposite. And I just like it better. And I like this because if you turn on this like introspective lens of your mind, then you can literally feel like you're being purified alongside Dante. And I also feel like Inferno is more descriptive, while Purgatorio feels a bit more introspective, and I just personally like this better. So yeah, having said all of that, subscribe and let's get into it. So we begin the story with Dante being in a pretty good mood. He and Virgil are sailing in a boat when Dante invokes the muses, gazing at the pale stars that slowly fade away into the blue morning sky. Then the guys reach the shore, they step out of the boat and they notice a glowing old man with a long white beard. The man's name is Cato and he's pretty shocked that someone has managed to get out of hell, and so he stares at the guys and he wonders if the laws of the abyss have been broken. To this, Virgil nudges Dante to bow his head and kneel down. And after they both do that, Virgil explains that it's not their own will that led them here, but rather the will of a lady from heaven who asked Virgil to accompany Dante on his journey. He then adds that Dante's soul seeks liberty, and if Cato allows them to enter and go through the whole purgatory, then he will greet Marcia from him. And Marcia was Cato's wife. But to this, Cato says that even though Marcia was very important to him when they were both alive, now she doesn't really move him that much because of the law of this whole place. But if the lady from heaven has sent them, then that's really everything that Cato has to hear, and so he allows them to enter. And he instructs Virgil to first wash Dante's face and to also gird him with rush, which is like a plant that grows near the water. And both of those are symbols of humility, which is of course necessary to get into purgatory. Then everyone leaves and Virgil and Dante make their way to the shore, where Virgil washes Dante's face and ties the rush around his waist. Now the sun is slowly rising, the guys walk along the shore when suddenly Dante notices a bright light emerging from the fog above the sea. And now as the light draws closer, they begin to see the outline of wings, and so Virgil immediately recognizes that it's an angel, so he tells Dante to kneel down and to fold his hands. And now Virgil praises the angel because he has this amazing ability to just sail on a boat by the power of his wings alone, and he's also so radiant that it's very hard to look at him. Now the angel sails to the shore, and it turns out that he has about 100 souls on his boat, who then all sing psalms as they get out onto the shore. Then they all say goodbye to the angel, who then slowly sails away. Sail away, sail away, sail away. So the spirits look around the shore and they ask the guys for directions, to which Virgil replies that they are actually strangers to this place as well. And then the spirits notice that Dante is alive and they get very excited about this, so they all gather around him. Then one of the souls from the crowd comes up to Dante and tries to embrace him with great affection, and Dante tries to do the same, but each time he tries to place his hands on the back of the soul, they just come back to his breast. And then he recognizes the soul that he's trying to hug, as it turns out to be Casella, who was a musician and a great friend of Dante. They talk for a moment here, and then Dante asks Casella to sing him one of his love songs that always soothed Dante's heart. Casella agrees, he begins to sing for Dante, and everyone gathers around him to listen to his music and forget about the purpose of their journey. To which now Cato enters the scene and he scolds everyone for being lazy and distracted. So then the souls fly away like a flock of startled doves, and Dante and Virgil run after them. Next we learn that the guys are getting closer to the mountain of Purgatory, and Dante notices a shadow in front of himself, but only one, and there should be two. And so because of that, he gets a bit scared that maybe he was abandoned. But Virgil notices Dante's worry, and so he says from behind that Dante shouldn't really wonder about Virgil's lack of shadow, as in the grand scheme of things, it's not really that important. And besides, it's pretty crazy to want to understand everything about the universe, as only God is able to have the full understanding. And if a person would be able to see all, then there would be no need for Jesus to be born on earth. Following that, we are at the base of the mountain and we see Dante and Virgil coming close to it. Now, the mountain is pretty steep, and so they both look at it and they wonder how in the world are they going to climb it. But then Dante suddenly notices a bunch of souls in the distance. So the guys come up to them and Virgil asks for some directions. But the souls just start to come closer like sheep from a barn, and then they stop as soon as they notice that Dante is still alive. And to this, Virgil, as usual, tells the souls that they don't have to fear, as Dante's journey has been ordered by the higher will. And in response, the spirits just say that okay, so in that case, they should just follow them. And then one soul emerges from the others and says that Dante knew him during his lifetime. And it turns out to be Manfred, who was the last king of Sicily and who was excommunicated while he was still alive. He tells Dante to find his daughter back on Earth and to tell her that as her father was mortally wounded in a battle, he gave himself to God, and so because of that, there's still a chance for him. But first, Manfred has to stay in the Purgatory 30 times the amount of years that he was excommunicated. But if his daughter prays for him, then his time in the Purgatory will be shortened. And that's actually the case for every soul in the Purgatory, as everyone's time here gets shortened whenever someone back on Earth prays for them. Following that, we learn that Dante and Virgil travel with the excommunicated souls until they reach a narrow path which they begin to climb. And Dante actually drags himself up the mountain as he's too tired to walk, but eventually they reach a flat space and they sit down to rest. They talk here for a moment, and then Dante gets a bit anxious about his ability to climb higher, and so he asks Virgil how high is this mountain, as it's not even possible to see its peak from here. But to this, Virgil explains that the mountain of Purgatory has this quality that the beginning of it is very tiresome, but then the higher you climb, the less it hurts. Then as they are talking, suddenly they are interrupted by a soul who shouts for them to come closer and rest with the others. So now they go behind a rock where they find a bunch of souls lying down, and those are the spirits of the lazy. Dante looks around and he recognizes one soul who sits with his knees embraced and with his head bowed between them. And Dante is like, Belacqua, what are you doing here? And Belacqua was a maker of guitars and other instruments, and also a very great friend of Dante. And Belacqua says that he would actually love to go up the mountain, but there's an angel near who would not let him, as Belacqua has to first sit in purgatory the amount of years that he has lived on earth without faith, which is exactly the amount of years that he has lived, as his laziness kept him from turning to God until the very end, when he was already on his deathbed. And then, as Dante is still talking to his friend, Virgil is already going up the mountain, and he shouts for him to follow, and so he does so. Following that, we see Dante and Virgil going up the mountain as they encounter some new souls. And the spirits here are walking while singing Miserere, but as soon as they notice that Dante has a shadow, the chanting changes into a very long "Oh." And two souls from the flock fly up to Dante and ask who is he, to which Virgil tells them that they should be very nice towards Dante, as he can turn out to be very helpful for them. As you know, when Dante goes back to Earth, he will be able to inform the relatives of the spirits that they should pray for them, and thanks to that, the spirits will get a boost into their purification. And to this, all of the souls immediately gather around Dante and explain that they are the spirits of those who repented at the last possible moment before dying a violent death. And so Dante encourages the souls to ask for anything they want, and he will do what he can after he comes back to Earth. To this, two souls emerge from the flock. One of them is Jacopo del Cassero, and the other one is Buonconte de Montefeltro. And they both just describe their violent deaths, and then after that they ask Dante to pray for them after he comes back to Earth. And then another soul steps out, this one named La Pia, who was a wife of a nobleman who killed her. And she also asks for prayers so that her soul can get faster through purgatory. Then, after promising the spirits that he will pray for them, Dante manages to get out of the crowd, and he continues his journey with Virgil. And as they are walking, Dante asks if the prayers even do anything, as he remembers that Virgil wrote in one of his works that praying for the dead is useless. But to this, Virgil answers that things were a bit different when he was alive, as back then prayer was separated from God. And he also asks that Dante should stop thinking so much, as everything will be explained by Beatrice later. And Virgil also reveals that they will meet with her on top of the mountain, to which Dante gets very excited. He's like, okay, you know what? I'm not even tired anymore. Let's hurry. But then, as they are making their way up the mountain, suddenly they come up to a lonely soul who looks at them with disdain. Virgil comes up to the spirit and asks it for the fastest way up the mountain, but the soul remains quiet. Then, after a moment, the spirit asks where the guys are coming from, and as soon as he hears that Virgil is from Mantua, he lightens up, as it was also his hometown. And it turns out to be Sordello, who was a troubadour, of course, from Mantua. So Sordello and Virgil embrace each other, and to this, Dante begins to lament about the state of Italy, as nowadays everyone seems to hate each other, even though they are neighbors. Then, after a while, Sordello and Virgil finally stop embracing, and Sordello asks who is he. Virgil introduces himself and explains that even though he did not sin, he was still denied the entry to heaven for his lack of faith. And to this, Sordello bows down, he embraces Virgil around his knees, and he begins to praise his poetry. Then Virgil asks for the help around the mountain, and Sordello says that he will guide them towards the nearby souls so that they can stay the night with them. Because it turns out that you cannot make even one step on the mountain during the night. And so Sordello then leads the guys towards a pleasant valley where a bunch of souls preoccupy themselves by singing Salve Regina. And those are the spirits of the people who, during their lifetime, occupied themselves with the worldly things to the point that they've just kind of forgotten about their souls. Now, Dante, Virgil, and Sordello all relax themselves here when suddenly one soul stands up, it begins to sing, and the spirits around begin to hum along. And then suddenly two angels descend from above with swords in their hands. And Sordello explains that those angels are here to protect the souls from a snake who's about to show up in any minute. So they all wait like this for a moment, and then they notice a big serpent in the distance making its way through the valley. But the angels fly up to it, they scare the snake away, and after that they all go to sleep. Following that, Dante wakes up and he recalls that he had a dream about an eagle that picked him up and then carried him into the sky all the way into a fire. And as Dante felt like he was burning alive, he woke up and began to look around. So now, as Dante is staring into the sea, Virgil tells him to be calm as they've already been transported to the gate of Purgatory. And then Virgil explains that as Dante was sleeping on a meadow, Saint Lucia came from heaven and then carried him all the way here. Now, they come up to the gate, which is guarded by a silent gatekeeper with a sword in his hand. After a moment, the gatekeeper breaks the silence and asks who they are. To this, Virgil explains that they've been sent by a lady of heaven, and so to this, of course, the gatekeeper lets them in immediately. So the guys now walk up the 3 stairs in front of them. The first stair is made out of marble, which acts as a mirror for Dante to see his own reflection. The second one is of rough stone, which represents a sorrowful heart. And then the third one is made out of bright red gemstones, which symbolize the blood that Jesus spilled for our sins. And then Virgil tells Dante to ask the gatekeeper humbly to open the gates, and so to this, Dante falls to his knees and he begs for the gates to be opened while he beats his breast 3 times. So the gatekeeper then draws his sword, and with it he writes 7 P's on Dante's forehead, like the letter. And of course, each P represents a sin. And then the gatekeeper draws 2 keys, one made of gold, which symbolizes remorse, and the other one made of silver, which symbolizes reconciliation. And with them, he opens the gates. The doors open, and Dante hears psalms coming from within. And so this is when we finally begin our journey through the 7 terraces of Purgatory, as previously we were more in a Ante-Purgatory. Now the guys pass through the doors of Purgatory and they hear doors closing behind them. But they just continue to move forward as the gatekeeper advised them not to look behind. So they make their way through a narrow rift and then they come out onto a plain where they just stand for a while trying to figure out which way to go. And as Dante looks around, he notices that the side of the mountain is made out of white marble, which is beautifully carved. So Dante stares closer and he notices a couple of scenes carved out. The first one being the angel Gabriel visiting the Virgin Mary, and the second one being the Emperor Trajan bringing justice to a poor woman. And those scenes show humility, which is the opposite of pride, and pride is the sin of the first terrace of Purgatory. Then suddenly the guys notice a bunch of souls coming towards them, but the souls seem a bit off as they are all bent to the ground and they're carrying large heavy stones on their backs. And so as the souls get closer, Dante hears that they are all praying the Our Father prayer. And after they finish, Virgil asks them for a way to any type of stairs that would lead them higher. To this, one of the souls points them to a path and then it introduces itself as Umberto Aldobrandeschi, who was a member of a very famous Italian family. And so the ancient blood and the heroic deeds of his family made him so prideful that he forgot that we all share the same human origins, and so because of that, he looked down on everyone during his lifetime. Avarice, I guess. The guy who reads the Italian pronunciation on the Google Translate has such a nice voice. Oh my. Okay. And then another soul steps out from the flock, and Dante recognizes this one as it's Avarice, who was a great painter during his lifetime, who of course looked down on everyone. Avarice says here that his fame doesn't even matter right now, as a new, younger painter has already taken his place, and so no one even remembers that a guy like Avarice existed and painted paintings. And as Dante is talking with him, Virgil tells him to hurry, and so because of that, Dante straightens up, because previously he was hunched as he was trying to catch every word that the soul was speaking to him. They continue their journey, and Dante becomes a bit self-conscious as he realizes that maybe he is too proud of himself. And they notice more of the carvings in the stone, but this time on the pavement. And while the previous carvings depicted humility, the ones here show pride itself in the form of Lucifer falling from heaven, King Saul with his own sword in his chest, and Nimrod standing under the Tower of Babel. Then, as Dante is still staring at the scenes, Virgil tells him to lift his head up as an angel is approaching them. The angel comes closer, and it says that it will show them the way to the stairs that would lead them further up the mountain. So they come closer to a path, and then the angel smites Dante's forehead with its wing, and then it promises them a safe passage. And as Dante and Virgil are making their way up, Dante realizes that the surroundings here are so much better than those in hell, as they can hear some souls singing fragments from the gospel. And Dante also figures that for some reason it's a lot easier for him to walk now, to which Virgil explains that when the angel smote his forehead, he removed the first P from it, which was standing for the sin of pride. And Virgil adds that after all of the P's are gone, he will no longer feel tired, and climbing the mountain will become a joy. So that was the first terrace, and I wanted to pause here for a moment to talk about pride and humility. Because what do you think about this? What is pride and what is humility? Because for me, pride was always more about how you treat others than how you treat yourself. You know, because when I think about pride, the first example that comes into my mind is when there are some people that think that they are so much better than another group of people. And so they kind of base their own value on hating others. So, for example, when you have people who are so proud that they don't use TikTok, for example, because TikTok is for the stupid and they are so much smarter and better than that. Or like when you have people who take pride in the fact that they don't listen to highly popular singers like Taylor Swift, for example, or something like that. And of course, I'm not talking about just not liking her music or not using TikTok for personal reasons. Because if you just don't like something or you just don't want to use something, then that's completely okay, you know? But it's more about how you treat others who do the thing and listen to the stuff. So it's when you make your way into stating that people who listen to like highly popular music or use TikTok or something similar, when you make your way into stating that they are for some reason worse than you, then that's kind of prideful, I think. It seems to be kind of prideful to just be like, you know, those people who use TikTok are worse than me. Or like, my taste in music is superior to those who listen to I don't know, Taylor Swift. You know, I'm talking about this because I saw it numerous times on the internet where people are like, oh, I'm not going to use like TikTok or Instagram or something like that because I am so much better than that. And it's just like, that's just an application on your phone. I don't think that it's that serious. And it goes with everything, really, with politics, philosophies, religions, so many things. And I feel like this really is the clearest example of this sinful pride, because when you just have a person that has a lot of achievements just because they like to work hard, for example, for their achievements, then I think that you can argue if that is like being happy with your achievements is a sinful pride or not. Because it can be, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be. While thinking that a group of people is worse than you, I feel like it's always going to be sinful, you know? So in conclusion, I think that if you look down on others and if you think that you are too good for something, be it like an application on your phone or a highly popular singer or something like that, then that's just a very unnecessary pride. Yeah, let's put it like that. It's just unnecessary. Doesn't help anyone. Probably doesn't even help you. And then when it comes to humility, I really like this quote by C.S. Lewis, which is not actually from him, because a lot of people think that it's from him, but it's not. It's from Rick Warren, who states, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less." I really believe that. It seems to be true. But Lewis also had an interesting thought on humility, which reads, "Do not imagine that if you meet a really humble man, he will be what most people call humble nowadays. He will not be a sort of greasy, smirmy person who is always telling you that, of course, he is nobody. Probably all you will think about him is that he seemed a cheerful, intelligent chap who took a real interest in what you said to him. If you do dislike him, it will be because you feel a little envious of anyone who seems to enjoy life so easily. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all." And so yeah, I really believe that to be true, and in general, I think that real humility shows in the act of serving instead of having this need to be served. And you can serve a lot of things, because it can be attention, it can be prize, gratitude, time, so many things. But now after all of this, let's get back to the story. So Virgil and Dante climb their way onto the second terrace, and Dante notices that this path will be a bit shorter as the mountain is getting more narrow the higher they get. And we don't really have any carvings here. Instead, the walls and the path are covered with only a smooth grayish rock. Now, Virgil says that they don't really have any time to wait for someone who will show them the way, and so he stares at the sun and asks it for guidance. After that, they make their way through the path, guided by their own will, until they hear a bunch of invisible spirits flying up towards them and inviting them to take part in love's feast. Then they hear a bunch of other things spoken by the spirits, things like, "Oh no, they have no wine," and the biblical "love your enemies." And Virgil explains that this terrace punishes the sin of envy, which is why the spirits here lash out with the reminders of love. Then they walk a bit further and they see a bunch of spirits praying to Mary. And Dante feels tremendous pity for them as he comes closer and he notices that everyone here is dressed in sackcloth and they're all leaning on each other for support. And on top of that, the soul's eyes are sewn shut with iron wire while tears stream down their cheeks. So Dante comes up to them. He first wishes for them to be cleansed from their sins as soon as possible, and then he asks if anyone here is from Italy. To this, a woman emerges from the flock and introduces herself as Sapia, And she explains that during her lifetime, she was more happy at another person's harm than at her own fortune. And she tells a story that during her life, she was watching a battle between her own people and their enemy, and she was extremely happy when she saw her people dying because she hated them. Then Sapia asks who is he, as he seems to have his eyes unbound, and to this Dante answers that he probably will have his eyes shut after his death, but not for long, as envy was not a big sin of his. Instead, he still feels the weight of pride on his soul, which will probably be his biggest offense. And then Dante promises Sapia to pray for her after he comes back to the world. And after this, he begins to speak to two other souls, and when he's asked who is he says that, to speak about myself would be a speech in vain, because I'm not really that famous or anything, even though he was already known when he was writing the Divine Comedy. So it's very possible that Dante just had some reflections after meeting the souls who sinned by being too proud. Then Dante and Virgil move a bit further, and they suddenly hear voices in the air yelling examples of envy, from which the most prominent one is the one of Cain, who was of course jealous of his brother Abel. So then the guys are greeted by another angel who points them to the stairs that will take them up the mountain, and then the angel erases yet another P from Dante's forehead. So they climb the stairs, and yet again they are welcomed by some fragments of the Bible being sung everywhere around. And now as they are walking, Virgil explains why does envy exist and how it shows in humans' hearts. Because according to him, humans desire worldly things, like money, for example. But worldly things are limited, and so when you share worldly things, you end up having less than if you just kept everything for yourself. Instead, if a person would place their desires on the heavenly things, then his heart would not be afraid to share, as in heaven, the more you share, the more you have. And to this, Dante asks, how would that be possible? But Virgil replies that Dante still makes the mistake of thinking about the earthly things. And all of this, of course, ties back to the Bible, as it talks a lot about differentiating the worldly things and the heavenly things, because you can't really desire both. And I actually have one nice fragment for you about this, which reads, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. The love of the Father is not in those who love the world. For all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, the pride in riches, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And the world and its desire are passing away, but those who do the will of God live forever." So yeah, the guys now continue their journey, and they arrive at the third level of Purgatory. And here, as usual, Dante is met with a virtue opposite to the sin that represents this terrace of Purgatory. And so this time, as he's walking, he's suddenly given a couple of visions which all represent meekness, the opposite of wrath. The first scene is of a crowded temple with Mary standing at the doors and asking the young Jesus why didn't he come back home and instead stayed at the temple and talked with the elders for 3 days. Then the next vision Dante has is of Pisistratus and his angry wife. In the vision, the wife says that their daughter has been embraced by a young man who should be punished for doing so. And to this, Pisistratus answers that what could they do to those who wish them ill if they want to condemn those who love them? Then the last vision is of the stoning of Stephen, during which he just wished for his persecutors to be forgiven by God. After those visions, Virgil asks Dante why does he look as if he was in some sort of trance, because only Dante saw the visions. And Dante says that he will tell him everything that he saw. But to this, Virgil tells Dante that he could have 100 masks on his face, and yet he still would would not be able to hide his thoughts, as after the soul gets separated from the body, it's able to see through everything. And Virgil adds that he didn't ask to know the answer, but rather to give Dante some vigor as he was moving very slowly. So they continue their journey when suddenly they see a thick black smoke in front of themselves. And the smoke symbolizes how anger can blind you. They go into the smoke, Dante closes his eyes because they are very hurt by the smoke, and Virgil offers him his shoulder so that he doesn't fall off the mountain. Now, they come closer to some spirits who sing the lamp of God. And one of the souls asks Dante if he's alive, and to this, Virgil tells Dante to answer the soul and to also ask for the way up the mountain. Dante answers that he indeed is alive, and to this, the soul introduces itself as Marco Lombardo, who was Dante's friend, full of virtues, but unfortunately very easy to anger, which is why he's here. So the guys start to talk about the lack of virtue in the world, and Dante asks about the reason for it, as he wants to write about it so that he can inform people who search for the reason both in heaven and on earth. And to this, Marco sighs and he says that people are blind because they blame everything on heaven, but if that would be the case, then the free will would not exist. And Marco gets a bit further into the topic as he explains that the lack of virtue is the fault of humans, as we came into this world as simple souls straight from the hands of God, but unfortunately a pure soul who knows nothing but a loving master seeks everything that brings pleasure. And if the soul doesn't have anyone who will lead it, then it can be deceived by the trivial pleasures. Moje paznokie złamane. O nie! I just broke my nail. Pretend that you don't see it. Okay? No, you don't see it. There's nothing to see. And so because of that, it was very important for the humans to have someone who would resemble a good king. But nowadays, the people in power also seek trivial things, and so because of that, the rest takes this flawed example and doesn't seek anything higher than shallow desires. Then the guys talk for a minute longer, but then as Marco notices that they're getting close to the end of the black smoke, he says that he has to go now as an angel will appear soon and he shouldn't really be here when it happens. Then as Dante and Virgil come out of the smoke, they notice that the sun is already setting, and Dante has a couple of visions, this time of wrath. And he sees scenes which include Haman and Lavinia's mother. And then as he gets out of the visions, he finds himself standing in front of an angel. Now, Dante is still not really able to see the angel, as he just seems to be completely white, but Virgil tells him to just follow the angel before the sun sets completely. Then, as they begin to climb the stairs, the angel removes another pea from Dante's forehead, and after they make their way to the fourth terrace, the stars are already shining on the night sky. Now, as they are standing on the fourth terrace, Virgil explains that this part of Purgatory is reserved for the sin of Sloth, which he explains as deficient love. And then Virgil begins to talk a bit about the structure of Purgatory. He begins by saying that neither the creator nor the creature were ever deprived of love, natural or spiritual. And he explains that the natural kind of love is always free from mistake, but it's the other kind of love that can go wrong by either chasing the bad things or by pursuing the good things too strongly or too weakly. So humans basically need to direct their love towards the good things, but also keep it in balance. And if they do that, then it becomes impossible to feel the sinful desires. And then Virgil adds that love is the root of every virtue, but also of every action that deserves to be punished. And he explains that the previous levels, so pride, envy, and anger, were for those who loved the evil brought upon other people. So in the case of pride, people want to rise above others by putting them down, and so their desire is rooted in wanting others to fall. In the case of envy, people fear that they will lose power, honor, or grace if another person rises, and it makes them so sad that they reverse their love. And in the case of anger, people feel wronged for some reason, and their minds become so consumed by the idea of revenge that they are driven into harming others. And now Virgil explains that they are getting close to another kind of wrong love. Because you see, in general, it seems that every person has an idea in their mind of a good that's going to bring peace into their minds, and everyone strives for it in different ways, which is basically like, you know, if something happens, then I will be happy, or if something doesn't happen, then I will be happy. Kind of like that. But if your love for the good is too weak, or if you fail to reach it, then your soul will end up on the first terrace of purgatory, reserved for the sin of sloth. Now the night finally sets and Dante begins to drift off to sleep when suddenly a bunch of spirits run towards him. And the souls here shout the examples of zeal, which is the opposite to sloth. Among some of the examples, there's a scene with the Virgin Mary running towards the house of Elizabeth, her cousin, who was at the time pregnant with John the Baptist. So Virgil now tries to ask the spirits about the way up the mountain, but to this one of the souls says to him that they are not able to stop running in order to talk. So then the souls just quickly pass by, and after that Dante falls asleep. Now as Dante is sleeping, he dreams of a siren who sings to him. And as soon as she's done singing, another woman shows up, but this one is holy, and she begins to fight with the siren. But then quickly after that, Virgil wakes Dante up and says that they should go. To this, Dante stands up, and as soon as they begin to walk, an angel shows up on their way, and it removes another pea from Dante's forehead, then it shows them the right way, and after that it flies away. The guys then climb to the 5th terrace of Purgatory, and Dante says that he's not able to stop thinking about the siren from his dream. But then he quickly comes back to his senses as he notices a bunch of souls stretched out on a rock with their faces pointed to the ground. So Dante comes up to one of them and asks the spirit to introduce itself. The guy says that he was known as Pope Adrian V, and he's here because he was very greedy during his lifetime. Because for the longest time, he thought that becoming a pope would satisfy him. But then as he became one, his heart was still not at rest. And because he was not able to climb anywhere higher, he finally turned to God, but it was too late for him to avoid the punishment. And the Pope explains here that they all lie down on the rock with their eyes fixed on the ground, because this is exactly what they did when they were alive, where they only concentrated on the worldly things, and because of that they were not able to look up to the heavens. Then Dante wants to kneel down before him, but the Pope says that there's no use in that, and he just hurries him to climb the mountain. So the guys continue their journey, and here they hear a couple of spirits shouting the examples of poverty, which is the opposite of greed. The examples are of the Virgin Mary giving birth to Jesus, and also of Saint Nicholas of Myra, better known as Santa Claus. Dante then comes up to the spirit who was shouting the examples, and it turns out to be Hugh Capet, who was the founder and the first king of the House of Capet. And now Capet just basically regrets here that he was the root of this horrible family that has nothing to do with Christianity. Which is interesting because Capet's family was partially the cause of Dante's exile from Florence. heavens. So Capet just laments here about his family being so greedy for the earthly things, and then after that they part ways. But as soon as the guys move, they feel an earthquake, which makes Dante a bit scared. But Virgil just reassures him that there's nothing to worry about as long as he's guiding him. So then they just stand here for a while, and after the earthquake is gone, they continue to walk. And as they're walking, suddenly a spirit appears behind them and shouts, "My brothers, may God give you peace." So they turn around and Virgil returns the greeting, and he says that he wishes the spirit to feel peace as Virgil himself was banished from it. The spirit then asks, well, how come you were able to get so far into purgatory if your soul is not worthy of heaven? To which Virgil points to the piece on Dante's forehead and says that this one is destined for the good above. But he's still alive, and so because of that, he needed a guide who would have the sight that only a bare soul is able to have. And so this is exactly why Virgil is here. And then Virgil asks about the cause of the earthquake, and to this the spirit answers that every time the earth shakes here, it means that a new soul felt pure enough to rise to the heavens. Then the spirit reveals that he's been in the purgatory for 500 years, and he just recently felt like he was ready enough to enter the heavens, and so the earthquake before was due to his own ascension. Statius. Let's go with Statius. Let's mix things up a bit. Sometimes you get the Italian pronunciation and sometimes you get the English one. To this, Virgil asks him to introduce himself, and it turns out to be Statius. He was an ancient poet who was greatly inspired by Aeneid, which is Virgil's work, and Statius says here that Aeneid was like a mother to his poetry. Then he adds that if he could only live on earth during the times of Virgil, then he would gladly accept a longer punishment in purgatory. And to this, Virgil now stares at Dante with this look that orders him to be quiet. But Dante is not able to contain himself, and so he smiles as one who gives a wink. And to this, Statius looks at him and he's like, well, why did you smile like this? And Dante doesn't really know what to do now, so eventually Virgil gives up and tells Dante to speak up. Dante then reveals that it's Virgil who guides him through purgatory, and to this, Statius immediately leans down in order to embrace Virgil's feet. But Virgil tells him not to do it as they are both just shades here. To which Statius now stands up and says that the poet can now see how much Statius loved him, as in his foolishness, he treated a shadow just like something real. Following that, we are informed that Dante and Virgil have been led by an angel to the 6th terrace of Purgatory, where the angel erased another P from Dante's forehead. And we also learn that Statius is traveling with them, and he's getting into some lengthy conversations with Virgil about poetry. Then, as they go further, suddenly they see a tree with some sweet smelling fruits. So Statius and Virgil come up to the tree, but then they hear a voice yelling, "Of this food you shall have scarcity." And then the voice begins to say the examples of temperance, as this level of purgatory is reserved for the sin of gluttony. The first example is of the Virgin Mary asking Jesus to conjure up some wine on the wedding party. And this is an example of temperance because Mary didn't ask for that just because she wanted to get drunk, but she wanted to preserve the dignity of the occasion. And then we get examples of both Daniel and John the Baptist fasting and getting something greater in return. And then the guys move further along the path until they encounter a crowd of spirits singing a psalm with the words, "Lord, open my lips." And And the spirits here seem to be extremely skinny, with the bones prominent under their skin. Now, one of the spirits comes closer to Dante and seems to know him, but it's so deformed that Dante is only able to recognize it through its voice. And it turns out to be Forese, who was Dante's brother-in-law and also his great friend. Dante gets a bit emotional here. He says that seeing him in such a state brings him grief comparable to the one that he felt when Forese died in real life. So then Forese begins to explain that the tree that they've seen earlier is fueled with the power from the Eternal Council, which makes everyone here so skinny and pale. And then he explains that the spirits here are being purified from their gluttony. And then Dante gets a bit surprised that Forese is so high on the mountain, as it's only been about 5 years since he has died, but to this Forese explains that he was basically allowed to speed run through the purgatory thanks to his wife's prayers. Then after some talking, the guys continue their journey, and soon after they encounter another apple tree, this one surrounded by the spirits who lift their arms and cry towards the tree. And as the guys try to get closer to the tree, one of the spirits tells them not to go any further, as this tree is an offshoot of another tree that is placed at the very top of the mountain, the same one from which Eve has eaten. So they continue to walk. Everyone is very deep in their own thoughts, as suddenly an angel appears before them, points them to the right way up the mountain, and then it brushes its wing along Dante's forehead, removing yet another P. And then the angel says that blessed are those who don't consume beyond their needs, and after that it disappears. Following that, Dante, Virgil, and Statius make their way into the last 7th terrace of Purgatory, where they encounter flames of fire at the edge of the path. They carefully walk around them, and as soon as they get closer, Dante notices spirits walking through the flames and praising the examples of chastity, which is the opposite of lust, and the last is the sin of the 7th terrace. Among the examples, we hear about the mythological Diana, and just in general about the wives and husbands who were chaste according to the vows of marriage. Then the souls around notice that Dante has a shadow, and it makes everyone very curious, and so they ask, why is that? And as Dante wants to explain, he notices another group of spirits coming face to face with the ones already here. Then the spirits briefly kiss each other, and the group who just came yells Sodom and Gomorrah, while the other one yells the story of Pasiphae, who craved a bull, let's put it like that, and in result gave birth to Minotaur. And then after a while, the groups begin to walk in the opposite directions to each other. And the groups are separated because obviously one group is for the homosexual people and the other one is for the heterosexual ones. So I don't really know what happens when you are bisexual. And so as the group leaves, Dante begins to speak to the curious spirit from before and explains to him his whole journey. He then figures that it's actually Guido Guinizelli, who was a very famous and loved by Dante poet. They talk for a moment longer, and then the spirit disappears into the flames, and Dante continues his journey with his friends. And as they keep walking, they notice that the sun begins to set on the horizon, and suddenly an angel appears before them. The angel sings a fragment from the Gospel that says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," and then he says that the guys are not allowed to go any further until they pass through the flames themselves. As you might imagine, this frightens Dante quite a bit, and so he turns to Virgil, who tells him not to worry because death doesn't exist here, it's only torment that can hurt him. But But Dante just stands there motionless and he stares at Virgil, who then tries to encourage him by saying that Beatrice is just a wall away from him. But Dante is still not convinced, as he fears that he will see Beatrice just a moment before his death. So then Virgil is like, okay, so we came all the way here, and now we are just going to stand on this path. But then Virgil smiles like a mother to a child, and he steps into the fire first, as he tells Statius to walk behind Dante so that he feels safe and protected. So then they walk through the fire, and during the whole way, Virgil tries to keep Dante's mind busy by talking about Beatrice and basically being like, oh, I can see her eyes already, which is so sweet. I love the relationship that they have. I think that in general, like, one of my favorite genres of fiction, or it doesn't even have to be fiction, but like one of my favorite genres is basically just like men gathering into a group and then going on a journey. Like, I don't know what it is about that, but it's so amazing. And you have so many examples of that because, you know, you have some medieval poets writing about this, like, I mean, Dante writing about this, but then you also have Lord of the Rings that is also kind of about this, you know, just like men gathering into a group and just going on a journey. And actually, I think that you also have that in the Bible. Kinda. Because when you look at it, you basically have Jesus and the apostles, and they kind of go on a journey in a sense. So yeah, so nice. One of my favorite genres, for sure. But yeah, going back to the story. The guys now walk out onto the stairs and they hear a voice of an angel from above telling them to go up. And as they begin to ascend, they notice that the sun is almost under the horizon right now. And so not long after that, the night sets and they all lie down on the stairs and they fall asleep. And Dante dreams about a young woman who walks in a meadow and gathers flowers. And she says that her name is Leah, the one from the Bible. And she explains that while she finds pleasure in action, her sister Rahel finds it in contemplation. Then after the dream, the guys wake up, still on the stairs, and Virgil says that today Dante will be happy and satisfied like never before in his life. So they very happily continue to climb the stairs, and after a while they finally reach the top of the mountain. Then Virgil stops Dante and tells him that after he guided him through hell and purgatory, now is the time to part their ways, as Virgil is not allowed to go anywhere further. And then he adds something very interesting, because he says that from this point Dante should take his own pleasure to be his guide, as his own will is now pure and strong, and so it's not possible that it will lead him astray. And then at the very end, Virgil adds that he now crowns Dante as a ruler over himself. Which, yeah, I kind of believe what Virgil says to be true, because it basically sums up to the fact that when you are very deep in sin, then you desire things that are not the ultimate good for you. But then when you let go of sin and you begin to cultivate your virtues, then your desires change and they align with the God's will for you. And so those are some terms that are very religion based. And if you are not that into religion, then you might be like, what on earth are you talking about? But I feel like it can also be explained with normal terms from your day-to-day life. So let's take, for example, gluttony as the sin and temperance as the virtue. Because I can tell you that I was definitely on the two opposite sides of the spectrum in my own life. And so, like, especially when I was in university, where there was a lot of stress and just like not very good times, or like not that they were bad, but you know, they could have been better. So there was a lot of stress, and I was definitely very deep in gluttony, just because when I was eating, like, food was more about regulating my emotions, or like not even regulating, but just like making me feel better, you know, because I'm so stressed during the day and everything, and then I can buy myself like fast food or something sweet and I'm going to feel better when I eat it, you know. That was basically my reasoning back then. Or it was not really reasoning, it was just something that I did, which is actually what I think Virgil was talking about, that your desires are not really aligned with what's actually good for you, because yeah, eating so much fast food and sweets was not very good for me, that I can tell you. But right now in my life, I'm very, very much into temperance and just like seeing what my body really needs and then eating the things that are good for my body, you know. And so sometimes I might not even eat something that I like when it comes to the taste, but I know that it's good for me because, for example, it has a lot of protein or something like that, and so I'm going to eat it because I just concentrate so much on what I put in my body and I just want to eat healthy. And yeah, and so I feel like this is how I understand Virgil, in that sense that, you know, when you are very deep in sin, then you desire things that are not good for you, that God would not really want for you, because, you know, they bring this like temporary satisfaction, but in the end you are actually worse than before after you do the things that are considered to be sin. And this is kind of what Virgil was talking about the desire and desiring different things, because I can tell you that my desires changed so much, because when I was very deep in gluttony, if I would go to the store, I would probably search for the things that were not very good for me, but I knew that they're going to give me this like pleasure when it comes to the emotions and just like this hit of sugar maybe or something. And so I was desiring those kind of stuff. But right now, when I cultivate my temperance so much, I don't even look at this stuff, you know. And sometimes it's so weird because I go to the store and I see something that I know that in my university years I would be like, oh, I have to eat it. But now I see it and I'm like, oh, this is so bad for you, you know, so much sugar. Like, oh, that's so, that's bad. And so like, yeah, the desires change. They change so much. So yeah, I know that my desires changed so much when it comes to food specifically, other things as well, but like I think that food is such an easy example to explain because, you know, everyone eats food, and so like, you know, you can relate to that. I'm sure that you can relate to eating food. So yeah, I really understand Virgil in that sense, that your desires change so much depending on if you cultivate your sins or your virtues. Or at least, you know, I see it like that. But is it really like this? Who knows? So yeah, going back to the story, Dante finds himself in the earthly paradise, and as you might expect, he is totally mesmerized by everything around. He feels a gentle breeze on his face, and he's listening to the birds as he steps into an ancient forest. Then he walks for a while until he reaches a stream called Lethe, which is said to grant complete forgetfulness to anyone who drinks from it. And now, as he's staring at the water, he suddenly notices a woman at the other side of the stream who is picking flowers and singing. And so Dante shouts for her to come closer, and she does. They begin to talk, and she says that she came here to answer every question that Dante might have. So Dante asks, how is it that this place resembles Earth so much? And to this, she explains that they are actually in the Garden of Eden, which is so much closer to God's will than to any earthly rules. And she explains here that there are two streams here. The first one, Lethe, is for erasing the memories of sin, while the second one, you know, is for restoring the memories of every good deed. And then, as she says that the ancient poets who sang about the Golden Age might have dreamed about this garden, Dante turns to Virgil and Statius and smiles as he notices that they are listening to her every word. Following that, we learn that they walk along the stream for a while, and then suddenly Dante notices a bright light flashing across the forest, almost like a lighting that doesn't fade away but keeps growing brighter, which actually kind of reminds me of the elves going through the forest in Lord of the Rings. So as Dante stares at the light, he suddenly hears a beautiful melody coming from that direction, and then he sees 7 golden candlesticks emerging from the light, which some people interpret as the 7 sacraments of the church, and other people interpret that as the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. Then Dante looks back at Virgil, but the poet is as mesmerized as him, and so no one is really able to explain what's going on. And then from behind the candlesticks, Dante sees a group of people in white robes and also 4 creatures with green leaves on their heads and also 6 wings covered in countless eyes. And as Dante, the author, is describing those creatures, he ends it with, "Reader, I cannot waste any more rhymes for those creatures, so go read Ezekiel." And then we learn that between the 4 creatures, there's a chariot pulled by a griffin. Now, at the right side of the chariot, there are 3 dancing maidens who represent the 3 theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. And then at the left side of the chariot, Dante sees 4 maidens clothed in purple, and those represent the cardinal virtues of justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. And then at the very end, Dante sees a group of men, among which we can recognize Saint Luke, Saint Paul, James, Peter, John, and Jude. And then at the very end of the procession, we can see Saint John, the same one who wrote the Apocalypse. Now, the procession comes closer to Dante, and as they are close enough, they stop just as if they were ordered to do so. After that, the people in front of the chariot begin to stare at it, and one of the people from among the crowd begins to shout for a woman to come out. Then everyone starts to scatter flowers everywhere around, and soon after that a lady shows up dressed in white veil, green mantle, and a red tunic. And of course, this is Beatrice. And after Dante sees her, he is completely mesmerized, and so he looks to his back to look at Virgil, but the poet is no longer here. To which Dante just bursts into tears, but he soon hears a voice telling him to stop crying, and so he turns back to the chariot and sees that Beatrice is talking to him. And then the angels sing a psalm to Dante, and as soon as he realizes how full of compassion it is, he begins to cry again. And then Beatrice starts to kind of scold Dante because she says that he was given an opportunity to develop every single virtue possible during his lifetime, but he didn't really manage to do that. And then she explains that in her youth, she was guiding Dante towards God, but then after she died, he forgot about her and started to look up to other influences. And so not long after that, he began to chase after the earthly things which do not bring the ultimate goodness and happiness. Now, because of all of that, Beatrice sent him on this journey so that he could see where his current life is taking him. And now Beatrice asks him if what she said is true, and to this, Dante just stands there for a while, not really able to say anything. So Beatrice tells him that he has to repent before tasting the waters of Lethe, and to this, Dante murmurs a very quiet yes. So to this, Beatrice scolds him again as she says that at the first temptation, he should have looked up to the heavens where she already was. And then Dante just stands there for a while like a little boy with his eyes on the ground, and after a moment he feels so ashamed that he faints. After he regains consciousness, he sees Mathilda standing above him and guiding him towards Lethe, where he drinks some of the water. Then he joins the 4 dancing maidens and they lead him to Beatrice. And as he's standing before her, Beatrice lifts up her veil and Dante is gone. He just stands there and stares at her eyes for quite a while, but eventually the maidens turn his gaze aside because he ends up losing his sight for a moment because of the amount of light, like very strong light that emanates from Beatrice. And after he regains his sight, he notices that the procession begins to move again, and so he follows it with Statius. They then stop in front of a bare tree and everyone embraces it and shouts Adam, because it is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the same one from which the first humans ate. And then a griffin comes up to the tree and attaches a pole of the chariot to the tree. And in general, it's said that the chariot represents the Holy Church and the pole represents the cross of Christ. And after the chariot is connected to the tree suddenly begins to renew itself, changing its color to a shade somewhere between rose and violet. The people around begin to sing a hymn which was never heard on earth before, and Dante is lulled into sleep because of it. And after some time, Mathilda wakes Dante up and she points to Beatrice, who now sits under the tree, and she's encircled by the 7 maidens who hold the 7 candlesticks in their hands. And as Mathilda is still talking, Dante is so captivated by Beatrice that he doesn't even recall the words that Mathilda is speaking to him. And Beatrice then tells Dante to write down everything that he saw here after he comes back to Earth, and after that some weird things begin to happen. And I'm going to give you a legend on the side for the symbolism, just so you can understand what's going on. So suddenly an eagle descends, sits on a tree, and it begins to tear apart its bark and flowers. After which the eagle beats the chariot, causing it to sway like a ship in a storm. And then a malnourished fox shows up and it tries to jump into the chariot, but Beatrice quickly scares it away. And then the eagle flies away and it leaves the chariot covered with its feathers. And then from beneath the chariot rises a dragon and it stings the chariot with its tail, tearing the floor and then leaving right after. But the chariot quickly restores to its previous shape, and after that he grows a couple of horned heads. And then a shameless escort appears along with a giant and they both kiss each other. But then the woman's eye turns to Dante and that makes the giant very jealous, and so he beats her and then he drags both the escort and the chariot to the forest. And after this whole thing, Beatrice now walks up to Dante and asks him why is he not asking any questions. Dante replies that she knows better what needs to be said, and to this she explains the whole scene that just happened. Then they come up to the stream called You Know, and Mathilda guides both Dante and Statius towards it. They both drink the sweet water, which Dante describes as the most holy water, and then they both come out of the stream, both reborn like regenerated trees with new leaves. And then at the very end, Dante adds that they are now both pure and disposed to mount onto the stars. And with that, we end the story. So that was the whole story of Dante's Purgatory. Did you like it? Now, in my video about Faust, I was talking a bit about the Enlightenment in Buddhism, and I figured that now is the perfect time to talk about the Enlightenment in Christianity, or at least in my perspective, because, you know, there's probably plenty of Christians who would not agree with me. And that's okay, because, you know, I'm not an expert in theology. I just really like the Bible. And what I figured is that Christian enlightenment can be compared to the programming that we have in our minds. And like, listen, I'm going to explain myself. Because when you look at your mind, you can kind of see that it works like a computer program full of little codes that you learn throughout your whole life. And first of all, please forgive me if you know anything about programming, because this will probably be a very simplified version of writing any sort of code. So, keep that in mind. But I like to imagine that our minds have lots of different codes that kind of look like, if sad, then, I don't know, like listen to sad music. Or if sad, then cry. Or in case of like, if you maybe have trauma, then you can also have things like, if something goes wrong, then blame myself, But I just feel like we have so many different codes like that, like if something happens, like if you feel a certain emotion, if you have a certain thought, if you encounter someone, or if you are put in a situation, like a specific situation, then your mind kind of tells you what to do, but it's not always good. The things that your mind tells you, not always good things. Because, as I told you, in case of trauma, you can have a lot of codes that don't really work good for you. Like, they are not really good codes. And those are the codes that you have to transform if you go to like therapy or something, So you basically come to therapy with this code of like, if something doesn't work out, then blame myself. You go to therapy with that, and then you kind of transform this code into something else. I kind of see our minds like this. I don't know if that's right or not, but I just I find a lot of truth to that. And so, after living for a couple of years on this earth, you probably have a program that you kind of consider to be yourself. But when it comes to Christianity and when it comes to the Enlightenment in Christianity, I feel like this program that you have, that was probably influenced by the world around you, this program basically has to die, which is kind of big to say, but it's for the good. And so in regards to all of that, I want to read you a short fragment from the Bible. It reads, "You were taught to put away your former way of life, your old self, corrupt and deluded by its lusts, and to be renewed in the spirits of your minds, and to clothe yourselves with the new self, created according to the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness." And so going back to this programming theory, you have your old program that was created by the world and by you interacting with the world throughout your whole life. But there's a better program called Jesus. And so from my understanding of the Bible, the moment you get baptized, or like the moment when you really accept Jesus in your heart, is the moment when your mind is literally being reborn in the program of Jesus. It basically is just you adapting the codes that Jesus would have in his mind. So like, if mocked, then pray for the forgiveness of your oppressors. Or if sad, then pray, because he was praying in the garden. Or if interact with a sinner, then show compassion and understanding. Kind of like that, So it doesn't really have to be anything like, you get into this like almost like psychosis of like, oh, I am Jesus. Like, no, you can be normal about that. You can be like just behaving like him, just trying to be more forgiving, just opening your heart to people no matter who they are, and just being kind of, compassionate, I guess, and cultivating the fruits of the Spirit, of the Holy Spirit. And of course, I explain it rather simply here, but I feel like it's a transformation that takes some time. It probably has to be worked on till the very end of your life. So, you are never going to be perfect like Jesus was, because if you consider that Jesus was this perfectly moral human, then it's quite impossible for you to also reach that, you know? So you can work your whole life for that, and you are probably still going to have something to work on, which is not bad, you know? I don't think that it's bad. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts and what I understand from the teachings of Jesus. But as I said, I'm not really fluent in theology or anything, so I don't know, I just like to read the Bible. And I really like all of those lessons about the mind. That's probably one of my favorite things from the Bible, because it's just, I don't know, it's so fascinating. And yeah, it was very new to me when I was reading the Bible, and I was like, whoa, they actually talk about the mind so much and in such interesting ways. This is so amazing. So yeah, I really like it. Even though I'm not even Christian. Or am I? This is the big question. I have no idea. Sometimes I feel like I'm kind of like a Christian in denial, you know? Because I really do believe in the teachings of Jesus, and I love him so much. Just, even when you look at him, just like outside of religion, just like a perfectly moral person, he had such a good heart, such a pure heart. I don't know, there's just something about him that's so special to me. So I guess I do love Jesus very, very much. And he stole my heart, basically. He really did, with his teachings. And I love reading about him and just like getting to know him, kinda, you know, through the Bible and everything. Just such fascinating. He was so fascinating to me. I don't know. So I love him very much. Does that make me Christian? I have no idea, actually. I guess technically I am, because I was baptized Catholic, but that's kind of what you get when you live in Poland. Those are my thoughts. If you're interested, maybe not. So there's this fragment that I really like as well from the Bible. It says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." And so yeah, I feel like it really connects to this whole idea of having those programs in your mind. You know, like if something happens, then, you know, then something else happens, I guess. But you can change that, you know, you can renew your mind, and you can behave like Jesus, which is kind of nice. Like, imagine that you can be closer to being like Jesus. That's so amazing, even when you just think about this, I think. Even if you're not religious, maybe. I don't know. I know that when I was not really into Christianity, I still had a very, like, big place for Jesus in my heart for some reason, because he just seems so good, you know? He always seemed so good to me. So, yeah. It's a lot of talking. So yeah, the only thing that I need to tell you though is that in Christianity you are not really called to do this transformation by yourself, because it should be done through the acceptance of the Holy Spirit. And this is something that I can just tell you and not really explain it to you, because I don't really understand that enough to explain it, you know? Like, in my mind, I get it, I can tell you that, but I feel like something inside me is not really clicking with this, and so because of that, I don't have the full understanding of that. I don't really, yeah. So I can only tell you that. I cannot explain it to you. But I just felt like it should be said because it's very important. And just in general, it's very important in Christianity that you should not really do everything by yourself, you know, but be open to help, kind of. But yeah, that's everything from me. Tell me what you think about everything, I guess. And see you in paradise, because we just did Purgatory, so paradise is next. And thank you for watching, and bye bye!